What I'm going to do today is talk about a solo episode where it's just me, there's no interview. And what I want to share is two major things that I have found in hiring salespeople. And these aren't the only two things, but pretty much most everything builds off of them. So the first one is what psychologists call a locus of control. And there's two main types. There's the internal locus of control, this personal responsibility. I focus on the things that I have control over. I take responsibility when things go wrong, even if I did not cause the problem. And then the opposite of that is an external locus of control. That is more like the victim mentality. When somebody says, oh, it's because of this. It's not my fault. It's the economy. It's my territory. It's the product. It's that customer. It was a bad day. Pretty much anything but themselves. Now, why is this so important? It's so important in sales because if you're not focusing on your control, the things that you have power over, then what are you focused on? You're focused on the things you don't have power over. And you come up with this blame mentality, this victimization, and you're not seeing the things that are really going to make the most impact on you. So to look for these things during a job interview is critical. And if you're a rep listening, you've got to develop this internal locus of control. Some people call it personal responsibility. Others call it ownership. Whatever name you give it, you can Google locus of control. A lot of people commented on it and said, oh, you mean focus? No, it is a focus, but that's not the term. It's locus. And then I pushed back on them. Well, don't you think you should have checked that before you just asked? Anyways, what we have to do is ferret this out in people before we hire them, because developing this is so critical and so kind of counterintuitive in a lot of ways, in that just because something goes wrong doesn't mean we can't react to it in the right way. And I use weather or being on time as a great example. One of my nightmare hires, I made this mistake based off of a referral. This engineer that I hired showed up at least a half hour late for their interview. They called and they expressed that there was traffic and everything, and it was raining. But I was already there. I was already at the Starbucks where we were supposed to meet. And I go, this is not going well. I was just thinking to myself, this is a mistake. And they show up and, I hear, oh, he dropped his phone and his coffee. And you get these tales of woe. And you're like, well, this is a job interview. I got here 20, 30 minutes early, and I'm the person doing the interview. You get here 30 minutes late, and all I hear is excuses. Well, I made the mistake of hiring that person, and guess what? That pattern repeated itself over and over again. And when you tried to coach this person, all I heard was excuses, things that were outside of his control were the reason why he was not effective. And then I hear complaints from the customer. And I had this other person say, oh, well, he's so good at this stuff. And he was. He was very talented at what he did if he did it. The challenge was that he didn't show up. And it annoyed people so much. And I finally had to let the guy go. It was like, I don't know what it's going to take for you to learn this. But, you can only warn somebody so many times and they just will not own it. And in sales, we just can't do that, because if we don't own it, we're not going to learn. And how can you be coachable and improve until you take responsibility for it? And I see all these subgroups coming up on LinkedIn and on the internet about these little niches of people who have this thing or that thing that is outside of their control, as they think, and is in their way of becoming good at sales. Maybe sales just isn't for you. Is this changeable? It is absolutely changeable. The only challenge is only that person can change it. So in the interview process, we want to ferret this out because it's so hard to change and we have so little control over it that it will not change itself. Now, building off of this is number two. Number two is super critical. It has come up pretty much in every great interview that I've done with sales people that were highly recommended. And the more I think about it and the more I read about it and research on it, it really is one of those first principles of great sales talent. And it's curiosity. Now, at first you might think it's obvious. Well, but how many people do you know who are just curious? And people then put the word genuinely curious. I would rather think it's authentically curious. Genuinely has the implication that it's innate, that you're either born curious or not. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. What does matter is, are you authentically curious? Do you sit and wonder how things work? Does the person have questions already formed? Are they trying to understand the totality of the job and the role? And I had a great sales leader on the show, and his question was, during the interview, he would ask, well, I'm sure you have lots of questions for me. And he immediately flipped the interview to the candidate, and it immediately forces the candidate to think through. Now, if they're curious, they probably have 5 questions. Well, tell me about the best candidate. Tell me about what you would ideally look for. Tell me about hiring mistakes you've made before. Tell me about what are the best characteristics for this job. Tell me where you want to go. How'd you get here? I read about this. I did this. You have examples of how they're curious. Now, why is curiosity so important? Is how do you learn without curiosity? Isn't curiosity that first step, that little trigger, the little match that lights the fire of interest? Now, can you have interest without curiosity? I don't think so. And when you're with a client, curiosity is a give. When you're curious about the other person, authentically, genuine, however you want to describe it, that other person feels that psychological oxygen. It begins that first step of being understood. And when you have that, that is the beginning of a great conversation. Now, if you don't have curiosity, what is the side effects of it? Well, they're pretty robust and pretty dangerous. You're overconfident. And in sales, if you're not constantly thinking about what do you wish you knew, what are you missing, what elements have you not understood yet, then you're not going to think about those. You're going to overlook them. You're going to sit in your comfort zone of confirmation bias, of I know it all, and not see those things. So during the interview process, I would look for curiosity. I would look for it in their past. Are they on a personal development program of some kind? What do they read? What type of movies do they watch? How do they become better? If they're open about it, as opposed to taking it personally, any feedback is a personal attack on themselves. Now, I'll get to this in a further episode because that's another element. But this personal responsibility of an internal locus of control and curiosity, if you have those two things, you can do a lot of building with the person. If the person isn't curious, how do they get better? They'll only get better if they get banged on their head, like they get written up or on a performance plan. And have you ever seen a performance plan work out? I haven't. Maybe they can. Maybe it's possible. Maybe I missed it. But usually it's so far down the wrong road that everyone's faking it. The candidate goes to look for another job. The manager goes to look to hire a new person. And everybody's pretending that this is a possible repair job. What we should be doing is hiring right from the beginning. And if these people are already on your staff, how do you develop curiosity? Ask questions like, well, what don't you know? What do you wish you knew? If you were them, what would you do? Which brings on empathy. How can you be empathetic without being curious? Now, I'm not talking about curious to the point of never being comfortable, but when you're off the phone, when you're not in a sales call, when you're developing an account strategy, without curiosity, you're going to miss the obvious red flags. You're going to fall into the traps. And too many people get comfortable with, oh, we'll make a mistake and learn. Okay, but did you learn? Learning is the knowing of preventing the mistake. And it is okay to make mistakes if you learn from them. If you don't, how are you going to prevent it from happening again? And which brings up another point is like if they're a mismatcher, meaning that you see this all the time on social, where no matter what somebody says, they say the opposite. Now, are they saying that because they believe it, or are they just saying that because they can't agree with somebody? I'm not sure how many customers like mismatchers, but let's stick with those two things: locus of control and curiosity. Think about somebody that you know who's curious. They're natural conversationalists. It's easy for them to start a conversation because they want to learn. And it's showing interest in somebody else, which ignites the law of reciprocation, where that person will show interest in you. Now, I'll be building off of this, and I know there's a lot of other things, but typically what we do when we're hiring is we hire people who we like and who are like us. And that is a kinesthetic feeling. I'm not sure it's very quantifiable. And if we've made hiring mistakes in the past, or we have too many people who are like us, and we need a little bit of a mix to build the team or round the team out. And also ask yourself, if the opposite clearly doesn't work, then it must be right. If an external locus of control just is a disaster in sales, which it is, just think about, okay, it's the last day of the quarter, the deal doesn't close, and all you hear is excuses about what they didn't have control over. But were any of those things preventable? Were any of those things controllable? Influence? Could you have influence over them? Are you owning it? Did you not have enough time? Did you not talk to the right people? Did they not have the right justification to make the deal happen? Or are they just blaming the weather, the situation, I love the no decision, status quo. That's a decision. It's a decision called no. It's masked in a nice bow and packaging, but it's still a no. And let's say you're not curious. Clearly, you may be able to get by as a B player, but are you going to become an A player without curiosity? Can you be coachable? Can you change without being curious, without wanting to learn more? Or are you going to take all kinds of feedback as a personal attack versus a constructive way of becoming better? Think about those two things. I got a bunch more of these coming. We'll see you next time on this. Let me know what you think.